More cruel than the devil, who really is he? There is an angel who is described as a symbol of ultimate evil, a destructive ruler with unlimited power, bringing senseless destruction. An angel who opens the door of judgment, where destruction and pain begin. Often understood as Satan, as a devil, because he carries a cruel and threatening mission. But what does the Bible say about this angel? Do you know who Abaddon is? Why does his role make the whole world tremble? Before starting to explore this story, please like, share and subscribe to give us more motivation to make more meaningful videos. Let's share and spread the word of God together, so that we can understand more deeply the secrets of this spiritual war and the eternal justice of God. To begin, we need to clarify the important difference between Abaddon and Satan. Although both are fallen angels, Abaddon's role is completely different from that of Satan the devil. Satan is the deceiver of the world, luring humanity into sin and turning them away from God. Satan's goal is to destroy people's faith. Abaddon, on the other hand, is not a deceiver. He carries out God's judgment, bringing justice to those who reject salvation. Abaddon does not tempt, he carries out God's mission, as the one who carries out the final judgment in God's plan. Satan, also known as the deceiver, is not just a name in classic stories, but a supernatural entity that has a profound influence on human psychology and behavior. Described as the one behind subtle temptations, Satan never attacks directly, but instead hides in the shadows of thoughts, silently sowing seeds of doubt in people's hearts. This causes people to gradually turn their backs on God and lose faith in His love and justice. Satan's main goal is not only to lead people down the path of sin, but also to keep them trapped in a never-ending spiritual war. Every temptation, every doubt he sows is a step toward creating a world of inner conflict, where people constantly seek salvation without ever truly feeling it. Satan is the creator of spiritual warfare, causing people's hearts to waver between faith and doubt, making it impossible for them to find the right path. Every time we face a major decision in life, Satan is behind it, promoting thoughts that make us feel that we can control our lives without relying on God's guidance. To better understand how Satan affects the human mind, we need to take a deeper look at the role of doubt in his plan. Satan does not need to make people believe something wrong right away. Instead, he simply plants doubt in people's minds, making them wonder whether God really loves them as he has promised. He poses the question in people's hearts, why should I believe in someone I cannot see? Why should I follow teachings without clear evidence? These questions, though seemingly harmless, are the first seeds that lead to a loss of faith and love for God. Satan does not need to use force to make people abandon God. He understands that by creating an environment of doubt, he can make people automatically abandon their trust in God. These doubts, however small, will gradually grow and spread like incurable psychological wounds. Once doubt has been implanted in the human mind, Satan only needs to provoke it, making it become a dark cloud that covers every thought and action of the human being. Satan is the creator of unanswerable questions, of doubts about God's justice. He does not need to make people believe that God is evil, he only needs to make them doubt that God may not care for them as he promised. It is this doubt that will cause people to fall into a state of lack of faith, and from there, they begin to seek salvation from other sources, away from God's guidance. Satan does not only operate in the realm of religion, but also engages people in spiritual warfare in every area of life. From small decisions like choosing a career, to larger issues like choosing morality, Satan is always looking for ways to influence. God's teachings of forgiveness, patience, and love are constantly tested by the temptations that Satan creates in everyday life. He causes people to face internal conflicts, where pride and arrogance fight with humility and submission. Satan understands that if he can make people question the very nature of truth and reason, he will succeed in causing them to fall into a state of disorientation. He knows that when people lose the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, they will easily be led into wrong actions without realizing it. Every time a person fails to live up to the moral principles that God has laid down, Satan succeeds in sowing another layer of doubt. Satan is a master at creating spiritual vortices. The temptations he creates are not simply false choices, but situations in which a person is faced with a struggle between self and sacrifice, between self and responsibility to God and humanity. Every time a person does something wrong, Satan applauds, not because the act is sinful, but because he has succeeded in making a person abandon what is right and go astray forever. Satan's ultimate goal is to make people abandon God. He wants them not only to turn away from God in difficult moments, but also to make them abandon their belief in the good things that God has taught. Satan does not need to make people lose faith in God immediately, he only needs to create a small distraction in their minds and make them give in to temporary temptations. When they begin to turn away from God, Satan continues to plant in their hearts the idea that God does not love them enough, that they do not deserve that love. Satan does not make people hate God, he makes them feel that they can live without God. Each temptation he creates is a small step towards weakening faith and gradually distancing people from the God they once loved. He cleverly exploits people's weaknesses, making them think that they can find happiness and success without God's guidance. This, although it seems like a liberation, is actually a sophisticated trap, causing people to fall into a state of despair. Every time people face challenges, Satan is behind the scenes, silently promoting doubt and fear. Challenges in life, whether health, finances or relationships, Satan often uses this to make people feel like they have given up and are alienated from God. When faced with difficulties, instead of trusting in God's guidance, they can easily fall into a sense of despair and disorientation, which is what Satan desires. Satan never directly tempts people by inciting obvious sinful actions. Instead, he exploits people's spiritual weaknesses, making them feel that the problems they are facing are too great to overcome, and that God cannot help them. He makes them suspect that God does not care about their difficulties, and that they must overcome them all on their own. When people feel alone and have no one to stand by them, Satan continues to exploit those weaknesses to pull them away from their faith in God. Satan is not only an enemy of each individual, he is an enemy of all humanity. Every time a person abandons God, Satan has another victory. But the important thing is, although Satan can deceive people and cause them to abandon their faith, he cannot change God's ultimate plan. The salvation that God has for those who truly believe in him cannot be deceived or stolen. Satan can cause people to lose faith for a moment, but he cannot take away each person's ability to return to God. Every move Satan makes is part of a larger plan that God has laid out. Abaddon is not like the characters we usually encounter in stories of darkness. He does not seek to deceive or tempt people, but has a completely different mission, entrusted to him in God's plan of justice. Abaddon's appearance is not a coincidence or an inexplicable event, but part of a grand plan that God has planned for a long time. As an instrument of final justice, Abaddon is not simply a bearer of destruction, but a vital part in the execution of God's final judgment. In his role as King of the Army of Destruction, Abaddon is tasked with opening the gates of the abyss, an act not to bring about senseless suffering, but to unleash terrifying creatures, sent by God as instruments of justice. The destruction that Abaddon brings is not an act of revenge, but the result of the rejection of God and the unrepentant spirit of those who have turned away from him. It is worth noting that, although Abaddon is often misrepresented in popular culture, he is not the embodiment of unconditional evil. In the Bible, Abaddon is not a brutal destroyer for his own ends, but an instrument of God in carrying out final judgment. His image, opening the abyss and unleashing an army of destruction, is simply the beginning of a larger plan in which God's justice is carried out in an absolute way. The justice that Abaddon brings may strike fear in people, but it is God's justice, a justice that cannot be changed, a justice that will restore all things to their eternal order. When we look at Abaddon's actions, it is easy to understand why people often feel fear. The terrifying creatures he unleashes from the abyss are not random beings, but instruments created by God to carry out a specific task, to draw sinful souls into judgment. These creatures are not sent to cause senseless destruction, but to enforce divine justice. Each creature from the abyss carries a powerful message: judgment is inevitable for those who turn away from God and live in sin. Unlike Satan, who manipulates hearts and sows doubt, Abaddon does not come to tempt or deceive. He comes for one purpose: to enforce divine justice. His actions may be painful, but they are an integral part of the chain of events that leads to the restoration and rebirth of the world. The justice Abaddon brings is not vengeance, but part of the process God created to restore the world to its original order. What is especially important in Abaddon's plan is the rebirth he brings after the destruction. Although his destruction may cause fear and pain to many, but that is only the first step in the restoration process. After the destruction, the world will be recreated, and only those who have the mark of God will be able to survive in the new world. Abaddon's destruction is not the end, but the beginning of a new world, where God's justice will be fully and completely executed. When Abaddon opens the gates of the abyss and releases the evil creatures, it is not the end of the world, but the transition to a new phase. Although many may think that Abaddon only brings destruction, in reality he is only the one who leads the world into a great cleansing. It is a restoration, where everything will be recreated and returned to its rightful place. Abaddon's image in popular culture is often misunderstood and portrayed as a symbol of ultimate evil. He is often portrayed as a destructive ruler with unlimited power, bringing senseless destruction. However, in the Bible, Abaddon is an instrument in God's hands, bringing about ultimate justice. His every action is part of God's perfect plan, where each step he takes is an integral part of completing the cosmic cycle. In many works of art, movies, and novels, Abaddon is often portrayed as a dark villain, an unbeatable enemy. However, if we look at Abaddon from the perspective of God's justice, we will see that he is not evil but an instrument of justice in a vast universe. The destruction that Abaddon brings may make many people feel scared, but it is an eternal justice, where all wrongdoing will have its consequences. Abaddon is often portrayed as a dark villain, an unbeatable enemy. However, if we look at Abaddon from the perspective of divine justice, we will see that he is not evil but an instrument of justice in a vast universe. The destruction that Abaddon brings may make many people feel scared, but it is an eternal justice, where all wrongdoing will face its consequences. Abaddon is often portrayed as a dark villain, an unbeatable enemy. However, if we look at Abaddon from the perspective of divine justice, we will see that he is not evil but an instrument of justice in a vast universe. The destruction that Abaddon brings may make many people feel scared, but it is an eternal justice, where all wrongdoing will face its consequences. The message of justice and hope in the story of Abaddon is not just about destruction and pain, but also reflects a deeper reality about the nature of God's justice and the never-ending hope. Although the image of Abaddon and the destruction he brings may be frightening to many, it is actually just part of God's larger plan, a plan where justice will ultimately be served and hope will always prevail. God's justice is not human justice, not the hasty and emotional decisions we often see in our daily lives. God's justice is expressed through absolute fairness, where every action, every decision is within a perfect plan laid out by him. When Abaddon is tasked with opening the abyss and releasing the evil creatures, it is not an indiscriminate punishment, but a purposeful act in the final execution of God's justice. God's justice is a justice that no one can escape. It is an infallible justice, where all who reject salvation and turn away from God will face the consequences of their choices. This is not out of hatred, but the result of rejecting God's love and guidance. The figure of Abaddon and the destruction he brings is only a prologue to a larger process where justice will be fully and irrevocably executed. Alongside absolute justice, the message of hope is always present in the story of Abaddon. When we face suffering and trials in life, no matter how insurmountable the difficulties may seem, we always have hope because of God and the salvation he brings through Jesus. God's victory is not just an end result of judgment, but also his protection for those who trust in him. Jesus is the source of eternal hope for all who seek salvation. Although the world may experience times of pain and trial, through Jesus we can find peace and redemption. Hope is not something vague or uncertain, but a sure promise that those who trust in God will be protected and guided by Him. The hope we have is not blind hope, but a hope based on the certainty of God's love and power. God is our protector. He is the one who never abandons us in the most difficult times. Every step of our lives is guided by Him, and even when we face terrible trials like the devastation that Abaddon brings, we can trust that God will never let us fail. In the darkest of times, when all seems lost, we can still put our trust in God's ultimate victory. Life is not always easy, but we can trust that God is always with us, and that victory will always be His. Those who trust in God will receive their just rewards, not because they deserve them, but because God is just and loving. Even though Abaddon brings devastation, let us not forget that God is still in control. Every challenge we face, no matter how great, is part of His perfect plan. God is always with us, helping and protecting us, so that we are never alone in our battle with the darkness. Although the road ahead may be difficult, we can trust that in the end, victory will always be His. God is the one who conquers the forces of darkness, and through Him all things will be restored. Let us keep the faith, for only by trusting in God can we overcome all challenges. Never forget that His protection is limitless and His love will never leave us. Those who persevere and believe in Him will receive eternal rewards. We are not fighting for ourselves alone, but for a world that is saved and reborn. Leave your comments about God's victory and share this message with others. Let us spread hope and faith together, for we are never alone in this journey.